Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar, 2018 State of the WAN, Too Complex to Ignore? Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You're welcome to submit questions at any time using the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll go over all questions at the end of the webinar. And of course, there will be a recording of this webcast available within a couple of business days. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Steve Garcon, who brings more than a decade of experience helping global enterprises design, source, and implement wide area networks with all major SD-WAN providers, MPLS services, and telcos, and Dave Greenfield, a veteran of IT industry who spent more than 20 years as an award-winning journalist and independent technology consultant. Today, he serves as a secure networking evangelist for Cato Networks. And before we get started, we are going to run our first poll question so we can get a little better acquainted. What are the primary networking challenges facing your IT organization in 2018? You can answer up to 3. Bandwidth costs, equipment maintenance and updates, performance between locations, performance to the cloud, and/or providing and managing secure mobile and remote access. Please start answering now. All right, we're seeing some good numbers come in. We'll give it just a couple more seconds here. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. Dave, please get us started.
Thank you, Bonnie, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to you all. Welcome to this week's webinar as we review the results from our 2018 survey. This year we went out and surveyed 1,600 respondents from across the globe, 1,608 actually, and of that 1,608, we reduced our base down to about 700 enterprise IT respondents. These are all people whose organizations are running MPLS as their backbone. Their split was about 70-30 North America and Europe. Actually, we had respondents in Africa and the Asia-Pac part of me as well, but about 68% were from North America, with a wide variety of titles within the IT domain and size organizations. About 72% or so had more than 10 locations. And as we looked through the data, and we did have an awful lot of data points to mine through. There's the overwhelming story, the big picture that came out as we looked at various responses, was a story of simplification, a story of how the complexity of our networks, both of our networking and security architectures, have gotten to the point where for many respondents, that was becoming the underlying problem that was driving things like downtime, that was driving things like long time to provision, that was driving challenges in management and more. And I think we'll see that as we go through the responses. Specifically, we asked folks about their networking and security challenges. The first two, the ones you'd expect to see, costs and defending against ransomware. But in addition, there was also strong interest in other areas as well. Equipment maintenance and updates, and cost of buying and managing security appliance and software. These are all things that get to this complexity issue. In this case, as it relates to appliances in particular. There are other challenges that relate to networking personnel, or challenges that relate to the challenges in bringing security to branch locations. Again, a lot of these issues have to do with a huge number of appliances that we need to deploy, to manage, and to provision. I know, Steve, you've had some real insight in this slide before we jumped onto the webinar. What's your perspective on these messages?
I think one of the important messages is how important security is. Security risk cannot be underestimated. The classic example I use is Maersk, the global shipping giant that moves 20% of the world's freight. A year ago, they experienced the NotPetya ransomware, and it cost them around $300 million in business. I mean, there was a real cost, and the same malware hit FedEx and Merck. You've got to have good people, you've got to have good systems, and what I find is many companies just don't have the staffing or the budget to do it right. And it's so hard to find good people, and it's so hard to keep on top of it, and the risk is enormous.
And that's a truism that we've known for a long time. But I think at least one of the points I know that you were saying to me before the webinar was that while we've known that for a long time, it's really becoming a challenge because of the amount of equipment that we've deployed, of the amount of software that we've rolled out in order for us to maintain our security perimeter in this case, or in order for us to accomplish our IT goals. The more components that are out there, the more people the more skill sets I need, the deeper the skill sets need to be to manage that equipment, the more complexity I've introduced.
Exactly. No, it's an awesome challenge to do for any company.
One of the things I find so exciting about SD-WAN, Cato SD-WAN in particular, is it's an opportunity to radically simplify the WAN infrastructure, WAN transformation in the truest sense of the word. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Alchwenze is a global engineering firm. They're based in I think in the Netherlands with locations in Europe and Asia. You see a simplified implementation of what it was before they went to Cato on your left side of your screen. And they had the kinds of problems that perhaps are very familiar to you. They had a mix of sites connected with MPLS and some with site-to-site VPNs. They needed the MPLS, at least they thought they did, for video conferencing and remote desktops, applications that generally require predictable latency and low packet loss. The branch locations had firewall appliances, nothing new there, right? And their mobile users also needed protection. It's not something we normally think of as a WAN requirement, but it was a requirement for them. They have an interesting business case where, again, perhaps it's not specific to engineering. There are other industries as well, but it is one that we find often in construction engineering, where they needed to be able to spin up project teams very, very quickly, right? Hours, days, and that just is very difficult with MPLS. So they went out, they wanted to address their agility issues, they wanted to address their cost issues, and they started looking around, and security as well, of course. And eventually they came to Cato and looked at us. In the end, we replaced their MPLS backbone with last mile internet links and connected all those locations into the Cato cloud. Of course, Cato has a predictable backbone, much more affordable than MPLS with comparable performance. So they were able to get rid of their MPLS and run their the real-time applications across the Cato backbone. And because of Cato security services, they were able to eliminate the on-premise firewalls and avoid the deployment of new ones, and save them not just cost, but also save them a lot of time, made them much more agile.
And secure.
And secure, right? Because it's one of those things that we don't really talk a lot about. But with the fewer appliances that are out there, with fewer moving parts, right, it becomes easier to enforce better security. You eliminate those blind spots, which implicitly make your network more secure. It's a good point. We mentioned cost reduction. Now, cost reduction has always been a major driver for SD-WAN, and that came out in this year's survey as well. About 40% or so said that they reduced the cost of their MPLS service. It's actually interesting to note that flexibility and agility were higher. What we normally see is prior to deploying SD-WAN prospects tend to think about SD-WAN as a way of reducing costs post-deployment. They often talk about the gains they've achieved in flexibility and agility. It doesn't mean to say they don't reduce costs, but it does mean to say that they really appreciate the agility that SD-WAN engenders. And we sort of, for this presentation, I just kind of drilled into those numbers a little bit further. And I wanted to share a finding with you, which I found particularly interesting. And maybe, Steve, you can offer some of your own insight here. 73% of those who are considering or planning SD-WAN, as we dig into that, more than half of those with SD-WAN deployments say they will increase or maintain their MPLS investment, right? So when SD-WAN was first introduced, it was often thought of as a way of replacing MPLS. It seems, though, Steve, that from these numbers, it's not so much replacing MPLS, but maybe augmenting MPLS.
It is augmenting MPLS, but the fact is you can eliminate MPLS depending on the latency you're dealing with between a data center and sites. But the fact is, the internet core, is a backbone that between regions can be complicated to deal with. To go pure internet from Asia to the United States, I wouldn't recommend it to a client unless they had an alternate backbone that is dependable, and typically that's an MPLS network. Europeans seem to be more conservative than American companies in migrating away from MPLS, but these statistics are pretty realistic.
So it sounds like while you're operating within internet regions, you might look at moving from MPLS to internet. When you start going between regions, you need to be more careful. You're seeing a lot more fluctuation, and latency and loss then. So you may want to retain
like within region, you might have, if your baseline latency is 50 milliseconds and it jumps up to 70, that's not going to be dramatic and noticeable. But if you've got 180 milliseconds that then jumps to 250, 300, it's the difference between
very
network
different
working and not.
Right. Exactly. This is Fisher, as I think is a great example of what you've just said. Fisher and Company, they're a manufacturing firm based in the U.S. They have sites in the Asia Pac and in Europe, and they were also dependent on MPLS for their global network. They had stacks of appliances actually in their branch offices, firewalls and WAN optimizers and routers, of course, and it became a network that was remarkably complex. Kevin McDade, the systems manager over at Fisher, put it to me. He said that he described his deployment as something that came out of a CCNA test. It had been designed by the carrier, and it was just remarkably complex. Simple changes to his firewalls, which were then being provided by his carrier, had to go through the provider. They would take a long time, and he was just getting very, very frustrated with the whole experience. Fisher began looking at SD-WAN, different models for SD-WAN. They actually trialed a managed SD-WAN service from a carrier before coming to Cato. What they found is, from what he said, was very interesting, that even though it was SD-WAN, it still preserved that same carrier-like experience. The management interface that they provided was actually more of a monitoring interface. They could see things that were going on, but they still needed to submit requests for even small changes, and that just meant delays and more delays, and he found himself very frustrated. Eventually, he moved to Cato. You'll see some of the numbers there. Significant savings, about 70% or so. He was able to reduce, but not just those savings. Not just in cost reductions. He also found benefits in other ways. Fisher was able to eliminate their security and WAN optimization appliances. They were able to, of course, cut their costs, and by simplifying their network, they also improved their resiliency and the control over the network. So a lot of wins by collapsing the network onto one cohesive SD-WAN fabric. The third observation that we had, that we wanted to share here, was the importance of branch security. We're not the first to note how security and SD-WAN had been coming together. I think we've all seen some of the different partnerships that have been announced in the market. Cato is one of the, if not the leader in converging SD-WAN and security. We were the first global security SD-WAN secure SD-WAN service in the industry, first one to collapse those two domains together into one single coherent network. And it's something that was very much resonant in our data. I know, Steve, you've done a lot of work in the area and looking at secure SD-WAN solutions or services. What's been your impression of those two domains? Are they coming together? Does this data align with your experience?
It does, but the challenge is, security augmentation to traditional SD-WAN requires another application, another infrastructure, a web proxy. It needs something, and as a result, it's challenging to manage. You still don't have one user interface where everything is in one place. And
I couldn't have said it better myself, Steve. The data shows that security budgets will grow. Actually, more respondents were more favorable about their security budgets than their networking budgets, and they were pretty positive about their networking budgets. While SD-WAN has always talked about security, that's always been about data transport, data delivery, right? So I think all SD-WANs today, Steve, have encrypted tunnels between nodes, between sites. It's pretty common, right? What the survey data seems to suggest, though, is more advanced security, threat protection, really, is playing an ever-growing role in the SD-WAN decision-making process. About 87% say that threat protection is either very important or critical to their SD-WAN decision-making.
It is so important. You look at a company like DuPont, a major chemical company, and one of their major moneymakers was Kevlar, and they had a security breach stealing the manufacturing process formula for Kevlar, and now it's manufactured by Chinese companies, and it's turned that whole business upside down. You can't rely on just a firewall or just appliances. You need to have a very skilled infrastructure to manage your security.
You made a comment before we walked in here on the previous slide. I'm going to pull you back to that, Steve. You talked about how having an external security appliance is not sufficient. You didn't like that, right? Maybe am I stating that correctly? That you just having an SD-WAN and a separate security appliance wasn't an architecture that you're particularly fond of. Can you elaborate on that?
It's really a minimalist architecture, and the next generation firewall is part of the process, but you have to look at how are you going to block phishing. Do you have a CASB solution for cloud access security brokering? You need 15 or 20 different applications to put together a good security infrastructure, and most companies aren't equipped to do that on their own.
So that's interesting. You can talk about simplifying the SD-WAN. That's one stage, but when you start talking about the secure SD-WAN, right, there's also another layer of simplification that has to go on, where you have all these various security components that, if you're not careful, you're going to end up having to manage and run them as well. And ideally, I guess you'd want to pull them all together into one coherent whole, if you can.
Exactly. Doesn't work well if you can't manage it properly.
That's right. Pet Lovers Center was a good example of the challenges and the benefits of converging networking and security together. They're a leading retailer of pet products and services, about 100+ stores or so in the Asia Pac. I think about 65 locations. There we go, in Singapore, and 40 elsewhere in the Asia Pac. The company had IPsec VPNs connecting the various locations to their data center, but they wanted to provide open internet access at each location. They had looked at connecting them all via MPLS. It's very, very expensive, and they had thought about deploying firewall or UTM appliances, but that also would just be remarkably expensive. It would take a long time to deploy. It would be complex to manage. Eventually, Pet Lovers came to Cato, and they started by connecting 65 stores in Singapore to the Cato Cloud and its fully integrated network security stack. They did that in about 6 stores a week or so.
Wow, that's fast.
Yeah, it is fast. It's really typical of Cato customers. They talk about how easy the service is to roll out, how fast our solution deploys. They continue with the other 40 franchises, and today they have about 105 stores connected to the Kata cloud because, because Kata operates both locally and globally. We're able to provide all the capabilities anywhere, no matter where Pet Lovers is, expands into. And they also didn't require any additional special products or optimal long-haul connections to make their network work. And the whole notion of security appliances, on-premise management of those appliances, as you can imagine, 105 locations, what a bear that would be, has been eliminated because they can now rely on Kato's security services that are built into Kato SD-WAN. I think this is number 4, but maybe I'm losing count here. I guess you guys, do we have hands here on GoToWebinar? You guys can chat me or something and say, yeah, it's 4 or not. But I think this is the 4th observation. So cloud support. Cloud support is no longer a novelty. Now that may sound kind of obvious to folks, but when SD-WAN was first introduced, connecting to the cloud was something that SD-WAN providers sort of did. They didn't do. It was optional. Some did, some didn't. Some didn't do it. They didn't do it very well. It was widely considered as being extra addition. I think today we can put that to rest. Based on our data, about 65% of enterprises have at least one cloud data center, and nearly half have more than one cloud data center. SaaS applications widely deployed, widely supported. Interestingly enough, the leading cloud data center service amongst the respondents was Microsoft Azure, not AWS. And the leading SaaS application, this is an easy one. Steve, can you guess? Leading SaaS application was?
SaaS, Salesforce.com or SAP or Office.
Exactly. Office 365. There we go. That's right. Microsoft Office. Right.
Throw me off guard there.
There you go. There you go.
No, and MPLS just isn't really suited for cloud applications.
Why is that, Steve?
Because the shortest path to a cloud application is over the internet. You're going over an MPLS backbone and then tromboning over the internet. You're using expensive bandwidth to pull your internet traffic back. I've sampled networks and 80% of their traffic could be going to the internet, but they're using an expensive MPLS network to get it there.
So this is from the man who used to run MPLS experts who now runs SD-WAN experts. So
exactly. Times change.
Times change.
Keep up with the changes.
That's right. When at the same time, nearly 8 in 10 respondents reported seeing improved cloud or internet performance as critical, very, very important to selecting their SD-WAN. What's also very, very important is security. Security is particularly important when picking both cloud applications and data center services. Steve, you've talked before about some of your experiences with cloud proxies and stuff. You want to just add to that?
Yeah, sure. One of the most classic offerings in the SD-WAN world today is, don't worry about security, use a cloud proxy like Zscaler and with a service chain. And, that works, but again, it requires some integration. It's more complicated, and you now have 2 user interfaces. And if your cloud proxy blocks malware, you want to know where it came from, who clicked on that email that shouldn't have been clicked on. And you're now looking at 2 different user interfaces trying to find the path. And it's not a simple, view one GUI and find the answer. And this is important. Also, Zscaler, depending on the footprint of your company, their cloud proxies may not be as close to your facilities as you want, and that could cause, performance degradation. So it's not the panacea that people think it is.
Right. Super. We speak about the cloud. I think Adderall might be the best example of how cloud and mobile access are just transforming the WAN. You might know them. They're a leading marketing tech company. They have, I think it's about a half a dozen locations, but that's not what's so interesting. Their hub is in San Francisco, and that's connected to their Amazon instance. or it was connected to their Amazon instances, as you'll see in a moment. They had locations in the US, Asia Pac, and Europe. But here's what's really interesting. They had 350 of about 500 developers that were working remotely from India, I believe. And all that traffic was being backhauled back to the San Francisco office, being put out through the VPN connection into AWS.
Through one single VPN appliance?
That's right. That's right.
So if that VPN appliance failed, everybody would be out of work.
Exactly.
Not good design.
Yeah. Well, he inherited. Adrian, who's the global director of IT, is a heck of a smart guy. He knew what he was doing, and but he did. That's exactly what he said. He said once the VPN on our primary firewall rebooted, and suddenly 100 engineers couldn't work anymore. Imagine that happening. So it was just impossible to manage the direct access to AWS from all the locations. So that's why they were backhauling, it was an architecture that simply wasn't working for them. They came back to Cato and eventually deployed with us. Now they have all their AWS VPCs are connected directly to Cato. The Cato Cloud is cloud intrinsic, meaning that there are no additional appliances you need to deploy into the cloud. There's no additional work you need to do to connect your SD-WAN into an IaaS or an SaaS deployment. It happens intrinsically because of the nature of the properties of the Cato Cloud. So with Adroll, they have all their AWS VPCs connected to Cato, and now users and sites can access AWS directly without any backhauling. User experience is much better, and they're now able to manage their entire network with a single policy. Have got great visibility into the entire infrastructure. This is our lapse observation, and I think it's one. Well, actually, I'm sorry, we're almost there. Hang in there, folks. We're almost there. For the longest time, we've had appliances and we've had services. The two have been very separate. Increasingly, what we're hearing from customers and from respondents in our data, in our survey, was that they are looking for the SD-WAN to be managed like an appliance, but be a service, right? Or actually say, they're looking for their SD-WAN service to be managed more like an appliance. By that, I mean that for the longest time, folks have turned to network services in general, because of network integration challenges, right? There have been some missing components that they wanted the service provider to provide for them. In the case of SD-WAN, with an SD-WAN appliance, you're dependent on the erratic internet. You don't have a backbone that you can send your traffic over, and if you go with a carrier managed service, they can use their backbone. In 2017, about 30% of respondents indicated that they were using a service provider. That jumped about 20% over the course of the year to about half of our respondents say that
that shift's very common.
Yeah, and I thought it was pretty significant. And it provided, for all the reasons that we've talked about. Of course, with any service, you run into a challenge. There are cost issues. There are agility issues. Steve, I know you're, besides being Mr. SD-WAN, you're Mr. Carrier, or at least you've dealt with probably more carriers than anybody else has around the world. Has that been your experience? Are there, cost and agility? Does that strike you as problems with carriers or not? Have you had good experiences?
Well, whenever I start an engagement with a client, the first question I ask is, who's your carrier? And then I ask, do you think your carrier offers great customer service? And everyone, actually, without exception, breaks out into laughter. Nobody's happy with their carrier, and you're paying for a service that isn't necessarily good service. And SD-WAN provides you with the flexibility to use any carrier you want. And if you don't like a carrier, you can move to another one, when you're using the internet. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, a lot of agility. You can use, any kind of medium.
That's why we're seeing a lot of the respondents in this year's survey preferred a co-managed model. It was something that we at Cato deliver, but we're not the only ones in the industry to offer this. It's a lot of a lot of interest in co-management.
Yeah, I like the co-managed approach.
Why is that?
Well, co-management kind of gives you the best of both worlds. When you have a managed service, your hands are tied. You can't manage the network yourself. A co-managed approach, it's a bit like AWS, for example. They manage the underlying infrastructure. You manage the instances on their infrastructure. If you need technical support, they'll help you with that. So with co-management, service providers keep the hardware and software infrastructure humming. They'll help manage when you need it, and you manage when you want to do it. If you want to make a quick firewall rule, you just do it. Versus with a carrier, you might take a couple days to get it changed. So it's kind of the best of both worlds.
Is there a difference between co-managed SD-WAN or co-managed security SD-WAN? Let me explain what I mean for a moment. I know in some instances, service providers, what they'll do is that they'll integrate your SD-WAN appliances with third-party appliances as well and package that together as a full service. This is what's been done with router servers and managed MPLS services in the past as well. So they do that with SD-WAN. Are they able to provide, is co-management as popular in those kinds of models as it is in, say, a pure SD-WAN service? Or
I think there's too much complexity in that kind of model. Carriers are not going to want the client to be making changes in that kind of infrastructure, because if something's done wrong, you could bring a network down. So that typically is a fully managed service.
So finding a co-managed secure SD-WAN service is much rarer, you're saying?
I think so. So.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's just too much variation in offerings out there.
I think PaySafe is a great example of of kind of a global SD-WAN of the benefits of co-management. So service providers in general, I don't know if you know PaySafe, but they're a leading global provider of end-to-end payment solutions. They have about 20 locations spread between North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. And through a variety through various M&As, mergers and acquisitions, PaySafe was left with a backbone that was built from, on the one hand, MPLS connected sites, and the other hand, internet-based VPN. The result of which was that they lacked a full mesh connecting all the locations together. Were
they using VoIP? Were there problems with VoIP in their network? Or?
Well, that's a good question. We generally associate VoIP as a fully meshed application, right? When sites speak with other sites, and I'm not sure that was an issue here. But what was interesting was Active Directory replication. That proved to be a big problem. It took too long for the Active Directory servers to replicate between locations, and the way that manifested and actually what drove the SD-WAN exploration for them was that users were complaining about when they moved between locations, between PaySafe locations, they weren't able to get access to the applications and servers they would normally get from their own offices. PaySafe went ahead and evaluated a wide variety of SD-WAN solutions. They wanted, one of the observations they had said to me was that they went in thinking there was one type of SD-WAN. They were surprised to find that there were SD-WAN solutions that just provided SD-WAN appliances working over internet backbone, and then there were SD-WAN solutions that actually provided the backbone as well. They very much wanted a managed, like I should say, an SLA backbone would be more accurate. And eventually they chose Cato. They replaced MPLS and internet-based VPN with a single converged network that allowed them to create a full mesh between all of their sites, because the moment that a site connected to the Cato cloud, it does become full meshed, which solved their Active Directory issues. It allowed them to have centralized access control for all of their locations. And fascinating. I mean, and of course, the mobile user or their users are no longer complaining about accessing resources when they travel between locations. Bonnie, I think there was another poll, so I'm going to hand it over to you. Here you go. Hold on one second, please.
All right. Thank you, Dave. Which of the following best describes the state of your SD-WAN deployment? You have SD-WAN. You're currently looking at SD-WAN within 12 months. You're considering SD-WAN. You have no plans at all for it, or you don't know. You can start answering now. All right, we'll give it just a couple more seconds here. Okay, thank you, everybody. And back to you, Dave.
Thanks, Bonnie. Our last observation is that SD-WAN is becoming more than just connecting locations together as we've commonly thought of a WAN, right? Normally, if I had asked you what is a WAN, you would say, well, you might have said it was MPLS. You might have said it was site, internet-based VPN. But in general, you'd say the WAN is that network which connects locations together. And I think what we're seeing is an evolution of that term. SD-WAN evolved due to the pressure from changes in how we work, namely cloud and mobile, and also on how business operates. IT organizations found themselves having greater requirements for agility, having to roll out sites in days, not in weeks, having to reduce their costs. Those pressures that were placed on the WAN were resolved to some extent by the SD-WAN, but increasingly, in accommodating those changes, the SD-WAN has evolved itself and to something which we call WAN transformation. The intelligence that the SD-WAN brings allows the SD-WAN to route applications, providing the optimum performance. The optimization capabilities that are built into the SD-WAN delivers the right application performance to meet the requirements. The reach, SD-WANs are now able to reach more locations and more resources. They're able to reach new geographies and the cloud, and all of doing that all without compromising security. We're seeing how the SD-WAN is shifting from just a resource that connected our offices to a resource that connects our offices, our cloud data centers, our SaaS applications, our mobile users, some cases our IoT devices. It's a fundamental change in how we think about wide area networking. Let me put this another way, perhaps. When SD-WANs were first introduced, it's something that I think you can call what I would refer to as SD-WAN 1.0. We combined last mile services for more capacity. We hadn't really virtualized the network. When we started seeing the startups come out with, they branded themselves as SD-WAN, that was really SD-WAN 2.0. That's when we virtualized the WAN. It led us to select the optimum performance for each packet between locations. But the issues of security and reach continued to limit the scope of SD-WAN. It continued to keep SD-WAN constrained to connecting locations. With SD-WAN 3.0, we expand the meaning of a WAN from connecting offices to all enterprise resources in one seamless network experience. It's a radical simplification in IT infrastructure with a very tangible result, reducing network and security costs by half often. For example, with Cato, we simplify your networking and security by converging multiple point product categories into one integrated solution. Our global SD-WAN replaces MPLS and site-to-site VPN and edge-to-edge and edge SD-WAN devices. Our security services replaced cloud-based secure web gateways, edge firewalls, and IPS. All of that is converged into our security services. We provide core CASB capabilities for accessing cloud data centers and applications. And then finally, we provide an optimized and secure remote access to replace VPN solutions. So all these capabilities are managed by a single console, a single experience, instead of dealing with all the different point products and management interfaces that Steve had been talking about previously. It's real transformation that dramatically impacts your costs and agility and end user experience. Steve, did you want to add something before we break here?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that complexity is the enemy of good engineering, and what you just described makes management capabilities much, much easier.
Well put. Thank you. So that's about it. You can download Steve RFP at the link below. This is a kind of an RFP template. I know that it's a great document, about 35 pages or so, and Steve actually I think Steve updates it as well. So when you download it, you can also sign up for an hour of free consulting with him, and he'll walk you through that and adapt the document to your needs. Right, Steve?
That's right.
The coupon code there, which is being shown, is Cato-RFP. And I think that's about it. So thank you all very much on behalf of Steve and myself. I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie now for a brief Q&A.
Steve and Dave, thank you guys for a great presentation. Before we start the Q&A session, I'd like to run this quick poll question. Would you like a free pilot that can get you on board with SD-WAN within 24 hours? You can start answering now. All right, we'll give this just a couple more seconds here. Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. And one last poll question. I'm going to leave this up during the Q&A, so feel free to answer until we sign off. Would you be interested in a free estimate of your networking and security cost reduction using Cato? Yes or no? You can start answering now. And Steve, I have some great questions for you I want to start out with. First question is, what would you recommend using as an SD-WAN, and when would you recommend MPLS?
Well, I would not recommend MPLS without an SD-WAN to start with. So I think I would recommend SD-WAN across the board for anyone with a wide area network. And if somebody weren't looking at Cato, I would be looking at SD-WAN, looking at MPLS any place where the latency along the path from an office to the data center, what have you, was on the order of 140 milliseconds or more.
Okay. All right, and next question for you, Steve. Can you use an SD-WAN in regulated industries such as healthcare or the chemical industry?
You can. It's part and parcel to understand your HIPAA requirements, but there are plenty of customers who are using SD-WAN in the health and chemical and other heavily regulated industries. Like many things, it's a matter of how your network is engineered and having things segmented and zoned accordingly.
Okay, great. And Dave, does Cato offer an IPS as part of its SD-WAN service too?
Thanks, Bonnie. Oh, yeah, good question. I think I mentioned earlier that as part of our converged security services, Cato includes Cato IPS. It's an optional offering with the Cato SD-WAN service. The Cato IPS is maintained and updated by Cato Research Labs. Our security researchers keep the IPS current, so you don't need to worry about patching the IPS and loading up new signatures and testing new signatures and deploying them. That's all handled by our team. In addition, because the IPS runs on our runs in the cloud, it inherits all the elasticity and scalability of the cloud. So you probably know that with an IPS appliance, you are concerned about enabling new features or decrypting intercepting SSL traffic, or adding new security patches because of the impact it's going to have on the IPS performance. That's not going to be the case. We have practically infinite scalability with the Cato IPS, and can maintain IPS processing performance regardless of the rules that are being implemented.
Okay, and Dave, what cloud data center services does Cato connect to?
Yeah, so Cato the Cato Cloud is cloud intrinsic, and by that I mean regardless of the the cloud data center service that you're using, it's trivial, as in like 10 minutes of configuration to connect to it. Don't hold me to that number. That's an approximate number, of course. So if you're running AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, we have customers running on a variety of services. You'll be able to easily connect Cato into that environment.
Okay, and we do have a lot more great questions, but unfortunately we are running out of time. So if any of your questions weren't answered just now, we'll be reaching out shortly. And I'd just like to thank everyone again for joining us today. And of course, to Steve and Dave, you will be receiving an email with a link to view this webinar just within a couple of business days. And we look forward to meeting you again in our next webinar. Thank you.